Christian Bateson, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you for having me.
Christian, I'm excited for this interview because you are so excited about this path, the path of buying a business.
Yep.
I don't think it's an overstatement to say that buying a business saved you from misery. So let's get right into it. Christian, please start us off with a little background on you.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm one of 8 kids. I grew up in a big family in southwestern New Mexico, very much like a kind of a blue collar upbringing, and worked a lot of crappy jobs in my teenage years, worked on farms for $4 an hour in the 110-degree heat. And that was kind of the theme of my, that's a theme that I think about a lot, is that everything that you've done in your life gives you perspective and gives you gratitude for what you have now. So anyway, we'll touch on that various points. When I was 15, I got a scholarship to go to Phillips Academy Andover, which is like, the best high school in the country, basically. That was a big life-changing event for me. So I was this, kind of redneck kid, went to Andover, Mass in 1991. Then that opened the door for me to go to Dartmouth College. And that was just sort of all great things happening to a small town boy.
Christian, let me stop you. How'd you get that scholarship to Andover?
So I had one older sister. I'm the second oldest of 8 kids. My older sister got a scholarship to go to a school in Connecticut. And it was just kind of like, I come from a family of smart people. Both my dad's parents went to Stanford, and, my parents took a different path, which took me out of these, sort of coastal population centers where this thing is more, where education is more valued. But, we grew up in a small town. There was not a lot of educational opportunity there. So they encouraged her to go off to this other school. And so then it didn't work out for her. She came back after a year, but then I kind of was like, well, I want to try it. Mm-hmm. So I just, I bought this guidebook, like the guide to secondary schools. And my parents really wanted me to go to a Catholic school, all boys Catholic school. But none of those offered any scholarships. And Andover basically offered me a full ride where not only they paid tuition, they paid to fly me to campus and home for, Christmas and spring break and summer. They put money in my account every week, just for, sundry expenses. And so, yeah, it was incredible, it was so different than anything I'd experienced.
Or that most people have experienced.
Yeah, I know.
But good for you. That's amazing.
It was. So I was like living in a dorm, at the age of 15, kind of could do whatever I wanted to. And I've always thrived on, just kind of being very independent and more of a loner, in a good way. Like my sports were wrestling and tennis. I was never a team sport guy. I don't have any partners or, outside investors in my businesses now. I just kind of like to do it myself. So, so anyway, yeah. So I was at Andover. I went to Dartmouth. I studied economics, and I always wanted to be a business owner. I realize this now. I think back to this. From a young age, I always wanted to own my own business, but then I kind of got seduced by the Wall Street money. A lot of guys from my fraternity went to Wall Street, and I'd go to New York City for the weekend and hang out with them and see the life they were living. And it was a great way to get to entrepreneurial money without taking entrepreneurial risk. So I ended up doing that out of college. I did 3 years as an M&A analyst at Bear Stearns, which was a really very, very useful experience in terms of analyzing and diligencing businesses. And so, having that hard finance background is very, very useful. And I use it, I use those skills to this day in running my businesses.
We're gonna return to that theme. But Bear Stearns in the aughts, I guess Stearns, this was
99 to 2000. Well, so I did.
Well ahead of 2008.
Yeah. So I worked there for 3 years as an investment banking analyst, and I took a year off. I had this crazy roommate and one of my best friends still who had this idea that we would do a year-long around the world trip. So we spent a year planning this thing. We got a ticket from British Airways around the world desk. You basically pay by continent. So we did 5 continents. And after 3 years, we took our backpacks and traveled, mostly Southern Hemisphere, Africa, South America, New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia. And that was amazing.
What was the place that most impacted you?
I give top
One,
five.
or one of.
Yeah, I
top
mean,
five.
it's very, like my top five are probably Thailand, South Africa, Australia, Italy, and Spain. So those are just. So anyway, I did this. I came back to New York, and I was crashing on my now wife, then girlfriend's couch, looking for a job, sort of casting about, and I was networking, and I still knew people at Bear Stearns, so that was how I ended up getting back on the derivatives desk at Bear Stearns. And just kind of got, instead of going to business school, I got like a job that they would offer to someone with a newly minted MBA, but I never went to business school. I traveled around the world for a year. So I did that job for 5 years, and I was getting promoted. I was making good money. For a guy in his late 20s, early 30s, I was making a lot of money, and it was fun.
What's a lot of money, Christian, if you don't mind?
Like, I made almost $1 million in 2007, and I was 31 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how common or not is that?
That was pretty common. I mean, the thing is, like, you never know on Wall Street how much anyone else is making, but it's a business where it's like tech. You can make a lot of money very young. It's not a seniority based business. It's really based, it's more of a meritocratic, and it, you generate economic value and you get paid for it, and you get paid sums of money, which to most people seem obscene. And so you learn not to talk to people in your family, for instance, or your, whatever, your childhood friends about how much money you're paying, because you get these looks and you're like, oh, I guess not everybody, not
basically,
everybody
Christian, anybody outside of Manhattan finance, you can't talk to. I mean, those are obscene amounts of money, but go ahead.
But there's always somebody making more than you. That's the funny thing. You always hear about so-and-so, who's making more. So, it's just, it's very much, it's an insular world, and it's easy to rationalize that you're worth it. And, and it is a meritocracy. It was also a bubble, right? And this is the unfortunate conclusion of that part of my career, was that Bear Stearns went bankrupt. The firm was taking, risk and basically borrowing short, lending long. They got in a liquidity crisis. And so I was asked to join JP Morgan for like a cup of coffee, basically 6 months. My boss and I were brought on board, and they took all our risks on board and figured out what they'd bought in my particular group. And then they fired us both unceremoniously in November 2008. So I was 32. I had a pregnant wife, pregnant with our first kid. There was really no bid for my job skills at that point.
Christian, let me stop you. No, first of all, is The Big Short, how accurate is The Big Short, the movie? And the scene inside, I know you weren't probably in the room with the CEO, but you might have a sense of how accurate that was.
I have a confession to make. I've never seen the movie. I've read all of Michael Lewis's books, including I just finished reading Going Infinite. But I'm much more of a book guy than a movie guy. People, like Moneyball. People are like, I love that Moneyball movie. I'm like, I read the book. I don't know. So,
okay.
But having read several accounts of Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, I mean, yeah. So I don't know. Maybe you would have to describe the scene for me in the movie for me to tell you.
We'll do that offline, or maybe it's worth 10 minutes. You can find it on YouTube. Yeah.
Like I was sitting on a trading desk, right? So I had like 4 screens, and I had my Bloomberg terminal open, and I'm just watching the market basically crash. Like I'm watching the meltdown. And I remember watching Goldman Sachs stock, and every tick it was like down $1. Like every time a tick would repopulate the graph after every 5 seconds, it was down like $1. And I'm like, this is it. Like this is the meltdown. And you were
right. And it was.
I remember when Bruce Listman, who was the head of stock trading for all of Bear Stearns, climbed up on the trading desk, and he was like, don't listen to the rumors. Just keep working. Keep calling your customers. And when the guy gets up, it's like the opposite, like when the guy says all is calm, and that we just knew it was over. So, and it was over.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it was a cool thing to live through. Yeah, it was.
Well, except then you thought you had kind of landed that plane with your JP Morgan coffee, then offer, then job. But then they unceremoniously gave you and your boss the boot. Your pregnant wife, and you finished by saying no prospects for your particular skill set. How is that? How is that? A guy making $1 million that the year the value you can't find value for your skills at when you were flying so high just a year earlier?
What we were doing was this very esoteric. We basically were levering up investors in fund of hedge funds by creating derivatives. So like, let's say you want to lever up to buy a house, you get a loan from the bank. But if you lever up to buy via a loan, there's certain tax implications. And if you lever up by buying an option, let's say an over-the-counter option or an over-the-counter swap, you get the leverage with better tax treatment. And so we were borrowing from the firm's like in-house treasury at like LIBOR plus 50 or something and lending out at LIBOR plus 150, making 100 basis points spread. And we're doing that on a big number. So making a small amount on a really big number. And then after the subprime meltdown, it wasn't possible to borrow money basically for free and invest it in really illiquid assets. The world decided that wasn't a good thing. And that was what I knew how to do really well. Yeah. And so all those desks and all those trades still existed, but firms stopped putting capital into it. And as a result, they were just sort of like in wind down mode. So,
okay.
And I interviewed for other jobs, but I mean, you have to remember all the firms were cutting jobs then. I remember interviewing at Bank of America, but then they bought Merrill. I mean, it was just a bloodbath on Wall Street.
Yeah.
So
by the way, this esoteric product that you were selling or trade that you were offering, I recall, I think it was Warren Buffett who said that derivatives are weapons of mass destruction because they're hard to truly unpack where the value is. Was he talking about instruments like the one you were
not
trading?
Really. He was talking about securitized products like CDS, MBS, which, I mean, that was at the root of the financial meltdown.
Mortgage stuff.
Yeah. So securitized products with underlyings being mortgages or loans or, other financial assets. So.
Okay. Carry on. What do you do?
So then I take some time, I travel, I go to Hong Kong and see my buddy, the guy I traveled around the world with. I came back, had to find a job. So I finally found a seat at a firm called Imperial Capital, which is like a small, scrappy, distressed boutique. And they said, we'll make you a salesman. So I had no experience as a salesman. I had no experience trading any kind of, distressed debt or anything like that. So, that was very, very difficult. They basically put me on a draw where I was, like, we'll pay you a minimum of $85,000 a year. And then if you earn above that, we'll pay you commission. And so it was just a commission job. And at one point I was about to get fired because I wasn't doing any trades because I didn't have any customers, because I didn't know how to get customers. Because nobody ever sat me down and said, this is how you do it. They just were kind of like, look, either he'll figure it out or he'll blow himself up or he'll just go away. So I figured it out. I kind of got to where I was making a decent living, maybe, 20, 25% of what I was making in 2007. And just grinding, just like I developed grit through those 10 years. I basically hated that job, but I did it for 10 years and, supported my family, and I learned how to sell. I really learned how to sell. And more importantly, and this is like, everything that's happened, like I was very unhappy for a lot of years, I mean, I felt like I have more sympathy than ever with like the child actor who, makes it big at a young age, gets the fun, money and fame, and then they fall off. And like, it's almost better to never have had it, I mean, I had made so much money and had so much success at such a young age that to get back to reality, it was hard, And to work with people who were making a lot, some of my colleagues just who had the good accounts and they knew how to trade, they knew how to sell, they made a lot more money than I did. And I'm sitting here like, like it just felt very unfair. But that was kind of like the lesson that I needed to learn at that point in my life, right? I mean, I wouldn't be where I am now if I hadn't had gotten slapped down by life and just had to kind of grind until I could get to the point to where I could see what the next move was.
I can relate to this. Christian, on the thing about learning to sell, I'm sure that's a podcast unto itself, but was there an epiphany moment, or was it just gradual that you just got better at it little by little?
Yeah.
Is there anything you can share? What's that?
No, I mean, it was just practice. I mean, it was just mostly learning by failure. I always tell my kids, you learn more from failure than you do from success.
Sure.
I think you learn much more valuable lessons. And so, I was sitting on a desk with guys all around me, and I could hear what they were doing, and I would emulate what they would do. As much as anything, what I learned is that, I'm not cut out to be a salesman. And my wife, when I first got the job offer, she said, you said you were going to take this job as a salesman. And I was like, oh, this is not going to be good. I did okay. I made a living, but a good salesman, when they get on the phone with their customer or when they're with their customer, is they make that person feel like they're the only person on earth. And like, there's nothing more important than what that person is saying. I just can't do that. I don't like people that much. I like some people a lot, but getting on the phone with someone every day and telling them about their weekend and whatever, like I don't know. I was just bad at it,
Okay. Yeah.
So no. I had a few customers who I had a really good relationship with, and they would, they valued I pitch them ideas, whatever, and take them out. We'd go play golf, and I had a few good relationships, but it was very hard. It was a grind. Like some guys, you meet some guys, and you're like, you're a natural born salesman. You kill it, and I was not that guy. So.
It's interesting. It sounds like what you think is a natural born salesman is in fact the kind of archetype that we think of, the charmer, the extrovert. And that, as I said, that's the archetype. But you'll see now articles floating around online or whatever, conversation online about how actually, the next level salespeople are introverted or are reserved. It's not what you think it is. It's not the glad hander and the back slapper. Any quick reaction to that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it depends on. I think having that personality is definitely a useful tool to be a good salesman, but I think that that's not that's not the whole picture. I mean, I don't know. I'll tell you, some of the best salesmen on our desk were definitely not that glad handing kind of guy. They were just, I think the one thing that they all have in common is that you have to be smart. You have to really understand the product and what value you deliver to your customer. And that's about a lot more than just being a likable person, Anyway, So we moved from New York. We got out of New York, moved to Los Angeles. And that was great in as much as, I had a house and a yard, but I was getting up at 3:30 in the morning every day and getting to work at 4. And so that made it, that brought up this whole other level of stress, right? And perpetually underslept. I had little kids. And we just felt like, my wife and I just felt that we were sort of drowning in LA. We were house poor, and, I had a lot of problems. I had a lot of substance problems and alcohol problems. And, I was kind of like this, that was like the darkest hour of my life, where I couldn't see a way out of it. And I remember thinking, I'm 40, if I could just grind for another 20 years, just put my head down and grind, that I can retire. And, I was like, being happy is not that important. I mean, what's important is to do your duty and support for your families, provide for your family. And so I died a little bit inside. Right. Yeah. And then that manifested itself in a lot of other problems. Home. What's that?
At home.
At home. Yeah. At home. Yeah. But also personally, I would go out with, I remember I had a customer, and they had this customer event in Florida. They called it the Marblegate Winter Classic, where they'd fly in their sales coverage, and we'd go play golf and, go out and on a big boozer, right? And so I got so hammered at this thing that I passed out at the table, and another one of my competitors took pictures of me and sent them to my colleagues at work. Look at this asshole. Look how he's behaving. And I remember at that same day, another one of my competitors that was there as sales coverage, and he asked me where I was. I said, "Oh, I'm at Imperial," and he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," or something like that. And I remember that it hurt that but I knew it at the same time, right? I needed to hear someone else verbalize that was the perception of this place, and it was a very toxic culture, It was a very difficult place to live, to work. So
say more about that, because you had shared some kind of what you witnessed your boss at that firm do has also taught you something important you've carried with you.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I traded a big piece of bank debt, and there was, look, the thing in the finance industry, it's all about money, and it's very easy to rationalize doing the wrong thing to get more money. And I saw my customer do that, where they were trying to get information out of me about the identity of the seller of this piece of debt. And so I didn't tell them, but it created this brouhaha at the end once my customer found out who the seller was, because they were an insider. And so I was sort of in the middle of this, and I knew that I had to just follow the rules and not disclose anything, but it was uncomfortable. So after they do this post-mortem, my boss has the IT guys listen to the recordings of my calls, and they determine that, something had been done wrong, or that there was some plausible reason that, that they didn't have to pay me the commission. So they didn't pay me the commission. And I mean, that money was life-changing to me at that point in my life, right? I was struggling. I was just starting to make money. And he was like, we're not going to pay you because X, Y, Z. And, it was a situation where the money made no difference to the owner of the firm. It made all the difference to me. So.
And so you thought he was just basically squeezing you on a technicality.
Yeah. Yeah. It was purely opportunistic, and there was I just felt it was unreasonable, to deprive me of that money that I needed. So, look, I mean, I've had phenomenal bosses and I've had terrible bosses, and I've learned plenty from both of them.
So what'd you learn from that guy? Don't be a dick.
Yeah. Look, what like, we'll get into this later, but I consider myself above all a student of human nature. And that means understanding your own tendency to rationalize the wrong thing just as much as everyone else's, and sort of realize when it's happening, that you're, oh, wait a minute, like having perspective on, and money, and nothing leads to rationalization of bad actions more than money does. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I'm grinding, I'm unhappy. And then my good friend, Ed Dugan, mentions to me one day that he's looking at buying this paintbrush business in New Jersey, which could get government contracts because it was domestic production of paintbrushes. So I'm like, what are you talking about? So he sends me a link to BizBuySell, and I start looking at this business, and then I start looking through BizBuySell more and more and more and more. And I was like, holy shit, you can buy a small business for 3 times cash flow. Like, what? Like, so to go back to the things I got out of that job for 10 years, when you're trading distressed debt, you're trading the loan of a company at 50 cents on the dollar. Something bad happened to that company. Your loans don't trade at 50 cents on the dollar unless either management messed up, the market turned against you, there was a technological change, or some kind of secular shift, whatever. So like every day was an object lesson for me in what can go wrong in business. And the other thing that I learned was that almost all these businesses that were trading at distressed levels had 8 to 10 times leverage on them. And so I just figured that, if you're buying a business of any size, it's going to be, trade for 8 to 10 times cash flows. So on BizBuySell, now I'm learning I can buy a liquor store in, Aspen, Colorado for 3 times cash flow. And I could pay myself $500,000 a year and live in Aspen. Like, oh, well, so then I started looking at, so then like the world starts to open up. By the way,
you must have still been drinking at this point in your life.
Don't worry, I never stopped that.
Okay.
But, all things in moderation or more so. So then it was like, at that point, it was like, I know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. I'm going to buy a business. And it was just a matter of like what business and where. So then as part of all that.
Christian, did you have any hesitation about like, these multiples seem too good to be true. There must be a catch. They must be crappy businesses that it must mean that, I'm going to be working 80 hours a week at a liquor store. Like, there must, given how good the economics seemed to you compared to what you were used to seeing, they must have seemed a little bit too good to be true, or no?
I mean, at that point, I was so miserable that I thought, look, if I have to work 80 hours a week doing this thing that, that is stressful, at least I'll be making money. At least, because at that point I was working really hard, but I was taking entrepreneurial level risk. I wasn't even making entrepreneurial level money. So it was kind of like all downside and no upside.
Okay.
So no, I mean, but yeah, I mean, as much as it was like, it was too good to be true. Right. But that's why the aha moment, because I kept looking and seeing more and more and more of them. And I realized that there was something I just had been completely unaware of. So
did Ed Dugan buy that paintbrush company?
No, he's still grinding in the business. Like almost all the old timers that I, worked with in high yield who I've told my story to, and they all say, you got balls and I'm happy for you. And I'm just going to go sell some more bonds. So anyway.
Well, good for you, Christian. Well, I guess what differentiated you from them was what? Your aforementioned loner sensibilities or the depth of your misery?
I've thought about that a lot. So look, I had an unconventional upbringing. My parents moved around. We moved from Oregon to New Mexico. My dad did a bunch of different things. Like my parents, they were like Catholic hippies in the 1970s, right? And then they joined this group and they moved from Oregon to New Mexico, and they just never worried about money. They never worried about just like convention. I mean, they just said like the line from the Bible. It'd be like the flowers in the field. The God takes care of them, whatever. And so. I just think I always had some like different things in my youth. Yeah. And then leaving to go away to boarding school, that was a huge risk, right? I mean, how many 15-year-olds would leave New Mexico, go to Massachusetts? I didn't know a single person in Massachusetts. I just went there, kind of figured it out, and so on and so forth. So, but yeah, let's be honest. I was very miserable. I remember sitting on my desk, looking out the window over Century City and just saying, it can't be worse than this, right? If I buy a business and it goes bankrupt and I have to file bankruptcy, like I won't feel worse than I do now. So what the hell, I have no downside.
Yeah. That's basically a no downside kind of argument.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, you were already at the bottom, so it couldn't have sunk further. Okay. Well, I love that because that's, I have said about buying a business, I said it in a recent episode, that one of my favorite features of this path is that for a lot of people, including yours truly, when you feel stuck, this path can be a way out of feeling stuck. And it's just, and part of the reason why I like to evangelize it, because it is not one that's obvious. It's becoming more and more known, but it certainly wasn't obvious to you, wasn't obvious to me. And yet when you stumble upon it, it's like the universe cracks open and all of this light shines, and you're like, wow, look at all the possibilities here. Not easy. Lots of pitfalls, everybody. Not saying everybody does this is successful and gets rich, but it's pretty compelling, and you're gonna be proof positive of that. Carry on.
Okay, so my wife and I decided we're gonna leave LA. We ran a process. We ended up in Atlanta, Georgia. So I will say that there are certain places where it's easier to do business as a small business, and Georgia's definitely one of them, and California is not one of them. So, I think it matters a lot, specifically for certain types of businesses. So we moved here. The cost of living is much lower. It just takes the pressure off, right? When your mortgage is not $10,000, it's $3,000. You don't have to start working and earning money right away. So basically took a year. Looked at a bunch of businesses. I looked at a tree service business that was doing $3 million of revenue, about $1 million of EBITDA. Put in an LOI and flew out here and met the guy. And, it was a fast growth story, which gave me pause. And, he had a good digital marketing apparatus, but still, I was nervous about paying full boat for a fast growing business. So somebody else bought that business. He ended up getting recapped. He still had to stay in and manage it, but he took some money out of it. Then I looked at a landscape business, sort of mow and blow and new design install. That guy was waiting on another buyer to come and put a bid, and I just got tired of waiting. And, I met the guy for lunch, got kind of a weird feeling, and just kind of was like, no, this is not the one for me. Along the way, I was signing lots of NDAs. I was looking at lots of businesses, not as much talking to owners, but talking to brokers, all on biz buy sell. So, I didn't do the outreach. I know a lot of people do the, create a website and call on business owners. And I think that works very well for some people. And I think it probably worked great for me. It's just the way my journey happened. I found my business on biz buy sell.
And you weren't other than Ed Dugan putting this in front of you, you weren't plugged into the ETA search community. No. Tuck being Dartmouth's business school, you had no connection there. And
no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing this
I did,
as a loner, as a self-described loner.
So someone had mentioned to me that Harvard Business Review had written this book about how to buy a small business. So I listened to the audiobook of that, and it seemed just very self-evident. Again, it was like everything came back to that aha moment that I had on biz buy sell. Like, of course, so every subsequent fact I got from the audiobook, et cetera, just sort of reinforced that, and nothing contradicted it. So anyway, I found on biz buy sell this business that I ended up buying that had been started in 1999. So it was at that point a 20-year-old business that was cleaning new construction. So come in at the end of large commercial construction projects and clean everything up before it gets turned over to the owner. And the guy had started it and made a lot of money and bought himself a home in Charleston on the water, and he was out on his boat all the time. So he was sort of tired of coming back and forth to Atlanta every weekend to go back to work, and had his brother running it for him. So then the brother was like, oh, my brother's making all this money. Maybe I'll do that. So the brother had started a business. And so, had said, you need to be, I'm not going to run this for you anymore. So I met Gavin McCormick. He was the guy who started it. My business is called Resolute Construction Cleanup Services. And, good interaction. We had a difference of price. He wanted $2 million for the business, which would be 1.5 million for the enterprise plus 500,000 for the accounts receivable. The business was doing about $500,000 of cash flow. So it would have been 3 times for the business plus another turn for the AR. And I just said, like, I'll just pay you $1.5 million and I want the AR to travel with the business. And just to back up a little bit, when I was deciding what kind of business I wanted to buy, I had a certain criteria, which were informed by my experience trading distressed debt. So I was like, always thinking about the downside, right? Like, what's a business that can go bust and how to stay away from that kind of a business. So like, I didn't want anything technology related because I don't understand technology, and technology can change quickly. I didn't want anything retail because I just saw how Amazon had like devastated small, retail businesses. I didn't want any kind of a bad lifestyle where I was going to be getting up early or staying there late. I wanted like regular daytime hours. And then I wanted something where I could be physically active and be involved in it, where it wasn't just a desk thing. So that's why I was drawn to like the tree service business. Like I could see myself learning to climb trees and getting up there with a chainsaw if my guy was hungover and didn't show up, or I could see myself, out there walking someone's property with them. And because I love flowers, I love gardening and all that stuff. So
why did you want something physical after a career behind a desk? Precisely because you'd had a career behind a desk and you wanted to change, or what?
Yeah. I mean, I'm an outdoors guy. Like,
okay.
I love camping and being out in the mountains. And, here I was in New York and LA for 20 years, kind of just, in the biggest cities in America. So I just, I really wanted something that would get me outside more. So
yep.
now I play golf instead, but anyway, we'll get to that. So I had found this bit. So all those criteria really gravitated towards service businesses, right? You want a stable business that involves managing people, managing customers, and managing employees, not managing technology, not managing inventory or capital, but just dealing with people all the time, which is difficult, and you get paid well for it. Those service businesses tend to have high margins. They tend to be more stable. So I give the guy my bid, $1.5 million, and we negotiated over the course of 6 months. And this is one thing that I really like about biz buy sell, or about inbound broker inquiry in general, is that you have someone who's told you they're a seller of their business.
Yeah.
And this goes back to when I was trading bonds, and something that I learned in my previous job is in a negotiation, if you have the leverage, you're much more likely to come to a favorable economic outcome. So I'll give you an example from the world of bond trading. If a guy is short bonds and they're going up, he has a short squeeze. He is losing money with every dollar the bonds go up. So he will almost always pay the price to buy the bonds rather than sit there and negotiate. So in other words, if someone's covering a short, that they're just going to buy more aggressively than someone who's deciding whether to be a buyer or not. So anyway, so in the case of a business, I knew this guy, Scott, was a seller. He had listed the business probably 6 months before I met him, and there was no other buyer, right? So I know I'm the buyer. I know that if I keep repeating my price, he's going to come down to my price. And that's exactly what happened. I didn't know that, but it seemed reasonable, and that's the way it played out. So
Christian, that is all well and good, except that, you do have something of your own runway that he may have perceived, which is you're unemployed, you're not getting a paycheck. And so you can't hold out forever and ever. Maybe you had enough savings that you could comfortably hold out for a long time, but care to address that? Because a lot of people listening, having a pretty tight, well-defined runway is a feature of a lot of people's search. They can't just kind of search indefinitely. So they don't feel like they just have I can wait out a negotiation sort of leverage that you seem to have had.
No. And in fact, I think that most people, I look at like private equity firms, right? They have a 7-year fund. They have to invest all the money and then sell and be out in 7 years. You get a lot of bad outcomes when you have a defined time frame. And I mean, that's just something that I know some people have. As I continue to buy my businesses, I just am always in watching and waiting mode, but I would never want to, commit myself to a time frame, because it's just that much more likely to have a unfavorable outcome. But in my own case, my wife was working full time. We sold our house in LA and done well on that. So, I mean, we were pretty liquid. When we moved here, the cost of living was much lower. So I felt like no financial pressure at all. If anything, it was just eagerness, I'm like, I see this thing, I want to do it. And I'm not the most patient person. So,
and Christian, what in your assessment of the business and risks and, your years of training to fixate on downside, construction, being tied, it sounds like you were tied to new construction, multifamily construction, or also commercial, office, any kind of building, any kind of.
Yeah. So we're on a number of big jobs right now. One of them is the biggest one's a data center, actually. We clean data centers, we clean warehouses. So we've sort of pivoted from, there's not a lot of new offices going up now. It's a lot more, but people are still moving to Georgia and they need a place to live. And that goes back to what I was talking about, jurisdictions to do business in. If you're in a place where people are moving, like Texas or Georgia or Tennessee, it just makes it that much easier in a service business, because there's always new people that need places to live. They need a new cleaning lady. They need to find someone to come mow their lawn. They need whatever, they need a place to board their dog. So if you're in a secular growth story, it just makes it easier.
Well, and so is that how so what I was going to say is just being tied to construction is by reputation very cyclical.
Yes.
And so that's a weakness when you're characterizing a business. Did you overcome that with what you just said, that basically Atlanta has a long-term secular trend of growth?
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one way that I addressed it was with price, that, if I'm paying 3 times cash flow for this thing, and if the business declines by 25 or 30%, which we'll get to that, but it did, but it still generates enough cash to cover the debt, to service the debt, and to pay me. And then, everything else is additional delevering or additional generation of cash is sort of gravy. But yeah, I've had this conversation with a number of people about construction. It is more cyclical. But I talked to the owner of the business, and I think he was honest with me. I just said, what happened here in 2008, 2009? What happened to your business? And he said, yeah, it slowed down, but it didn't slow down like it did other places, because people are always moving here, and, that there's just a big sort of like it helps that the government of Georgia, whether it's at the state level, at the local levels, is very pro-development. All governments of Georgia are very pro-development. They want to, whether it's Republican, Democrat, whatever, they want to grow the tax base. They want construction. They want, economic growth. And so, I think if I had bought a construction cleaning business in New York or California, I probably would be singing a very different tune. So maybe I've just been lucky,
Yeah. And well, I just want to call out a recent interview that will have aired a couple of weeks prior to this one with Alan Lockridge, who bought a hardscaping business in Charlotte, outside Charlotte, and said the very same thing. And when I asked him about, because residential construction, project-based construction, people's backyards would be one that searchers might be very wary of. And his point was that one of the ways that he was comfortable with it is that North Carolina continues to see a lot of growth, similar to your neck of the woods. So, two recent guests saying the same thing. Carry on.
Okay, so we negotiate. I made a mistake initially. I decided I was going to do an asset purchase instead of a stock purchase because that's what people said. And so I was down the road with a law firm. We had an asset purchase agreement drafted, and then, as I was sort of simultaneously doing my due diligence and understanding the business, I realized that Resolute had large contracts with very large general contractors that in some cases had been doing business with Resolute for 20 years. And they knew Resolute. And if Christian Bateson, former Wall Street guy, shows up and says, "Oh, I own Resolute now, but I have a different name. Will you novate this contract over to me?" Then their first question is going to be, "Well, who are you and what do you know about construction cleaning?" To which I would have to answer, "I don't know anything." And then they would say, "Actually, no, we're not going to do that." Or there was a material chance they would do that, right? That's what I would say. I would at least be asking questions and maybe trying to change the contract, squeeze a little extra out of Christian Bateson. So about halfway through my process, I was like, I'm going to have to do a stock purchase. Or I decided that the greater risk was not to do a stock purchase, even though it was going to, cost me more time and money and et cetera. So, and that there was some risk of like legacy liabilities that come with a stock purchase. But anyway, we switched over to a stock purchase. And we closed the deal finally about 6 months after I signed an LOI. And as of tomorrow, it will be 5 years exactly since I closed on my purchase of Resolute.
Skipping ahead, and then we'll rewind back into the story. How's it going?
It's much better than I would have expected. I have a friend of a friend who gave me a great piece of advice before I bought, which is that he said you will always tend to overestimate how much change you can effect in 1 year and underestimate how much you can effect in 5 years because of the compounding effect of doing things the right way. It just takes time. So yeah, at the 5 year mark, we're like 4x our revenues in 2018 this current year. So it's
awesome.
Yeah.
Great. So short answer is it's going really well. And I want to spend some time there. So let me put a pin in that, but let me just close the loop here on your deal. $500,000 in SDE. He wanted 3x plus the 500 in AR.
Yep.
And you talked him down to the AR is basically going to be your working capital. So you said, no, I'll just give you 3x basically for the business. You waited him out. He said, yes. The revenue of that point, did you tell us what the revenue was of the business?
It was about $2.5 million in 2018.
Okay. So it's a 20% margin.
Yeah.
$2.5 million.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And what did your deal terms look like? SBA. Yeah.
So I didn't have any outside money. I just, basically back to that theme of being a loner. I didn't have any partners or anything. SBA, I did a 10-year SBA at prime plus 2.5, which at that point was like 8%. Now it's 11%. So
you put a lot of equity in, as I recall.
I put like $411,000 of equity in. The loan was $1.24 million. And, it was $1.5 million to him. And then there was some fees, et cetera. I think I had a $50,000 holdback for accounts receivable because I did buy 500,000 of accounts receivable for him. So I had to hold back on the deal price to him, which was held in escrow for a year. All the accounts receivable ended up paying. And there was, there's never been any legacy issues that needed to be addressed by holdback or any of the reps and warranties.
Excellent. And when you said the equity that you put in, what percentage was that?
It was about a little under 30%, 25 to 30%.
Okay. Which is going to be a little bit bigger than many people listening will do, or your typical SBA purchase. Was that just to give you more room, less onerous debt payments?
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of SBA lenders,
because you could basically, you had the balance sheet to afford it, sort of thing.
Right. I mean, a few things. So first of all, from the get-go, I was always about thinking about the downside, which I've said before, and trying to be as to de-risk as much as possible proactively. But an SBA lender is going to look again at Christian Bateson and say, why should we lend you money to run a construction cleaning business? You're a finance guy, and so it helped a lot to get the deal underwritten to have that extra equity in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously other ways to address that. Like they said, you could bring in a partner who owns 20% and they have, actual direct experience, but I didn't want to do that. So
you said something to me in the pre-call about there being a lot of SBA lenders out there, and that's something to keep in mind. What did you mean?
When I was sort of negotiating this deal, and I was just sort of networking people, advisors, lawyers, accountants, and lenders, and the lawyer who I ended up working with referred me to an SBA lender, and that guy, and there was a difference of opinion in terms of what should be in the collateral, and there were some assets in my wife's name, and my wife was very, very uncomfortable with this whole thing. Like all these years that I'm miserable in LA, she's like, just suck it up and don't be a bitch. Like go to work. And like she's like, you're not taking financial risk. You're not putting our family at risk. You're not giving a personal guarantee. Just suck it up. Like, yeah, you're unhappy. That's life, right? The drinking she didn't like so much, but anyway. So as part of our negotiation to be able to buy this business, she was like, I can't have all of our assets be collateral for this personal guarantee for this loan. So I said, okay, well, this is in your name, and I made it a sticking point with this guy. That, look, this loan's well covered by my stocks, by my bonds, by my home equity, by my cash, whatever. This is my wife's and it's not in as part of the deal. And he was like, no, it has to be. So I have this buddy, Tim Clark, who is, he's actually the guy that got me on searchfunder.com initially. But I was like, Tim, what? And he was like my rabbi through the whole process. Like he started buying businesses in 2004 and he and I caught up recently, and he's just, he's done very well. So
gotta get him on the pod here.
Yeah. So anyway, I call Tim and I'm like, explaining the situation, and he's like, dude, screw that guy. If he doesn't want to give you the terms that you need, find another lender. He's like, there's 1,000 lenders out there that want to do business with you. They don't get to dictate the terms to you. If someone's trying to dictate terms and that's not the terms you want, then find somebody else. So it turned out the selling broker on the business that I bought had already sort of had it soft underwritten with another SBA lender, where he had a personal relationship. And that's how I ended up using, for the financing for my deal.
Great. So takeaway is, as Tim Clark put it, there are a lot of SBA lenders out there, and they all work for a bank whose, boards or advisory committees or whatever, I don't know the right language, decide on various criteria, various types of loans they're willing to underwrite, and what their various thresholds are and what's required, what's not. And there is a lot of variety across this universe of SBA lenders. So don't assume that the answer that you're getting from lender A is going to be the same that you're getting from B, C, and D.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's now turn to what you've done in these 5 years. So
Sure.
I said we would return to it. It's gone well. Maybe give us a picture of, say, the transition year one. How did it go initially? And then let's zoom out and hear kind of how the entire project has been.
Yep. So year one was great. I mean, it was definitely drinking from a fire hose, just learning all the people, all the who does what, and this customer and that. It's just a massive amount of knowledge to assimilate. None of it's very complex, but I had the guy, the brother of the owner, I had him on payroll for 3 months, and I was in his hip pocket just learning. And then I started kind of going out and doing it on my own. After 2 months, I was basically doing everything on my own, and I would pop my head in and ask him questions. And I mean, still to this day, I get excited thinking about just like how empowering it was. And the way I would describe it to people was that when you have a boss and your boss tells you to do something and you don't want to do it, you think it's stupid, and you're tired of explaining to the boss why it's stupid, so you just do it, but you die. Just a little bit inside, you just die, right? And that part of you, like, and I was like, I never feel that way anymore. If I'm going to do something, I do it like 100% A+ Christian Bateson style, or I just say, I'm not doing it, and either is a good choice, right? And so you get so much agency in your life. It starts out professionally, but then it starts to, at least for me, it starts to manifest in all these other ways in your life where you're like, the way that I run my business is the way that I try and do all the things that I do. So anyway, 2019 was a great year. We made money. In fact, we got so busy that our $100,000 cash in the bank was insufficient because there was a mismatch between me writing checks to my employees every week, and me getting paid by my customers after the 60, 90 days. So my accounts receivable went from like 500,000 to almost 900,000. And I had to go to my wife and say, honey, we need to put more money into the business because it's doing so well. And she wasn't very happy about that. So we sold some stocks and we took some money out of this and that. It was great. We were off to the races. Then COVID hit, and all of a sudden construction basically ceased. So now I have, 35 employees who like don't have jobs and are calling me, and, that was very, very difficult. The good news is that all of our accounts receivable that had ballooned all turned into cash. And so I went from, I had a bunch of money in the bank all of a sudden, which was a good feeling in a time of extreme uncertainty.
But you still got to meet payroll.
Well, I mean, if we're not working, then people aren't working. They aren't getting paid, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So, mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of the benefits of this business is that the variable costs is almost all. I mean, like labor is 90% of my cost,
mm-hmm.
or higher than 90%. So, my customers don't want me cleaning construction, then no one's working, and I mean, it was very disruptive, and I think less so here than maybe some places, but still, I mean, because of the types of jobs we were doing. So if you're cleaning, a high-rise office building, the outside skin of that building with like the curtain wall isn't like, they're not like going to the local glass store and buying glass and bolting it on. These are pre-manufactured components, manufactured in China at mass scale and shipped all over the world. So when the supply chain gets disrupted and shut down, that means that construction basically stops. And so you may have a contract and they may have a timeline to get the cleaning of that curtain wall done. But, when their ships don't come to port, then everything just got very delayed. So 2020, our revenue was down, 30% versus 2019. That was very stressful. Got some SBA money or some PPP money. And there was also SBA assistance for people with SBA loans. Mm-hmm. And then 2020, it started to come back. 2021 started to come back more. 2022 started to come back even more. And then last year, we're up 70% over 2022. And this year we'll be up, basically double what we were last year. So
phenomenal. Can you put some specific numbers behind that?
Yeah. So last year we did like 3.75 million of revenue. Wow. And I'm going to become a material taxpayer for the first time in my business's life because we had all these amortization of goodwill as well as NOLs, and so that's all kind of going to work through the system this year. And I'll be writing some tax checks. And
Christian, give us more on that. Give us assume somebody doesn't understand what any of that meant.
So I bought the business for $1.5 million. Okay. Of that $1.5 million, 500,000 was accounts receivable. So there was basically $1 million of goodwill. Goodwill is just the value of the business. That's not a hard asset. So you can, if you buy a business, you can amortize that over 15 years. So that's, I think, $67,000 a year, call it, that goes against your pre-tax profit. And then, we switched from book accounting to cash accounting. And so if you're a growing business, cash accounting gives you better tax treatment because you basically, to the extent that because your revenue is based on money that comes in the door. So because we've been growing, I've had more money going out the door relative to the amount of money coming in, because I'm writing checks on like a weekly basis and I'm getting paid, 60 to 90 days later. So those have been a couple of things that have helped.
So why that? Yes, that was great. Thank you. But going back to now you're going to have to start paying taxes.
Yeah.
Why at your, whatever this is going to be, I guess year 6, I thought I think the big tax benefit is the amortization of the goodwill, the $1 million over 15 years. So why is year 6 significant? I missed that.
It's not necessarily, it just has to do with the magnitude of the pre-tax income that we generated last year and that we will generate this year. Because the business is so, like, if my salary, so I have my employees who are frontline workers, and I have me and the other office staff, and then I have rent and insurance and all that other stuff. And this latter bucket, which are sort of my fixed costs, have been pretty stable, but now our revenues have gone up so much above that it's created this excess, sort of cash flow, excess pre-tax profit. And we haven't done our 2023 tax return yet.
Great. So you were at 3.75 million in last year, 2023.
Yep.
And just let me just do the numbers for everybody again. So you buy it, it's 2.5 million the year before you bought it, which was 2017 numbers, I guess. 2018 numbers.
Yep.
Then it dips down to 1.7 million in 2020 COVID. So you said that was about a 30% decline. And then by the end of last year, it's come back up to 3.75 million, looking good. And then this year you're projected to do what?
Probably about 7.5 million.
And where is all that coming from? How are you doubling like that?
We basically won, like, think about, the old man in the sea, where the old man like hooks the enormous marlin, and now he's like, oh shit, like, how do I keep this online? So we won this enormous contract. That's the game changer. It's to keep a data center clean. Normally construction, if you go on a commercial construction site, it's trashed, and we come in at the end and we get it looking amazing, right? And it might be trashed for 2 years. Well, this job, they want to keep it looking amazing for the entire 2 years. So this company has bought out basically a small army of cleaners to keep this data center looking really, really good throughout the entirety of the construction. And we've never worked with this customer before. They're, a really big contractor that does really big jobs. And, we won it. We started it at the end of November. So we're 3 months in now. It's going great. It's been very difficult. So, this whole thing about stable businesses that all these HBR and other things emphasize, it's a real thing. Managing a stable business is a lot easier than managing a declining business. A declining business is very hard for certain reasons. A growing business is very hard for certain reasons too. I mean, it's been so difficult to get people on site, and it's been a good learning experience, but it's been very challenging.
And what do you mean? Just the labor constraints? It's still hard to hire people, or something else?
We had to have there's been a lot of firsts. So we had to basically get a high forklift on site. So this forklift has to be able to reach up to the second floor of the data center, take off these trash dumpsters, and then truck them across this construction site. So it has to have big knobby tires and has to be able to reach up high. So it's called a lull lift, right? We'd never had managed one of those or operated one of those. We had to get a driver for that as well. So now we're trying to find a driver. We have cleaners. We don't have forklift drivers. We finally find a guy, and he's not the guy. He's causing all kinds of problems. He's pissing off the ladies by the comments he's making. And, so then we have to find another guy. And I mean, I don't know if you've tried to hire anybody lately, but if you go on Indeed, you'll get a flood of resumes. You might email 100 people who submitted their resume. You might actually hear back from 10 of them. And then of the 10 that you hear back from, like, one of them might show up for the job interview.
Yeah.
And that's the person you hire because they actually want a job, right?
Yeah.
So
wild. And so just to be clear about this particular, this big contract, which is going to be transformative for your business. So generally construction sites, you come in at the end and clean it up. And for the prior 2 years as the building's being constructed, the construction site is a mess with plastic sheeting and piles of junk and whatever. I mean, it's just, it's a construction site.
Yeah.
Like it looks bad. And what they want is, as they're building this data center, things to look spick and span mid-construction. That's an interesting need.
Yeah.
Just curious, what's the story there?
I mean, I've been told for some that it's, by some people that's what these data centers are more like, although that hasn't been my experience doing other data center jobs. I think it's this particular operator. I mean, it's a huge site, first of all. And so at this point and at that point, you have like restroom trailers and you have all these amenities. You have like a big, huge tent with like refreshments and stuff, because it gets hot in Georgia and a lot of it's outdoors. It gets hot in the summer. So like people can stay hydrated, hydration stations and whatever. So you might have 5 hydration stations and 2 restroom trailers, and they want to have one person just sit there and keep those clean all day long on a loop. Like, it kind of reminded me almost of like the experiences of my friends traveling in mainland China, where you go into a store and there's like 5 people behind the counter, like smiling at you, like this is kind of like the full employment act. So I don't know. I mean, I told the guy I was like, you guys are crazy to need this much labor. And they just kept saying that's what they wanted. That's what they needed. So I just kept refining my numbers and, yeah, so we'll see. It's been great. Like I said, the thing that I've realized is like how many customers we never did business with because of the way that the business was managed previously, which is that the brother who was running it, he was like, wanted to be out on the job site in his truck and like, wearing his boots and talking about hunting and fishing and stuff with these superintendents on these job sites. And he wasn't at his desk constantly bidding, constantly trying to refill the pipeline. He sort of saw that as like an afterthought. So I've had this amazing partnership with my field manager, Brandon, who, when I bought the business, says, I don't know shit about cleaning construction, but you do. And I know about numbers and I know about selling. I know about, executive stuff. So let's just have a partnership. And I said, I will back you up. I will give you autonomy, but I will have your back all the time. And he was like, sounds good. Let's grow this thing. He's like, I got it. So when we would have an issue, like one of our ladies would be dissatisfied with something or other in the old world, Brandon would tell her, you're behind schedule. We're over budget on this job. It's supposed to be 60 hours per floor. You're doing it in 80. That 20% is our profit margin. Like, you can't do that. And he would be hard on him. And then they would go to Gavin, who was the brother, and Gavin would say, oh, you're doing a great job. Like, it's okay. Right. So it was kind of like 2 people doing the same job that were undermining each other and no one minding the store. So now we just have like Brandon's runs things in the field, and I have his back,
Yeah.
And I give, yeah. So, and that's kind of the culture that I built, is that like one of my very favorite, business books is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, where he talks about building Nike, and he would hire somebody and he would say, tell them what to do, but don't tell them how to do it. Just like make people figure things out, give them autonomy. And then if they mess up, then you figure out what went wrong and you try to make sure they do better the next time. But Brandon is very good at that, and I'm good at what I do. And so, it's been a good partnership.
Mm-hmm. And Christian, what about the fact that you said a few times as you were taking us through the negotiation and acquisition process, you put yourself in the shoes of everybody else in this transaction, and you're like seeing Christian Bateson, former Wall Street guy. So that probably still is the perception of the employees and of everybody in this world that you're entering into. Have you had to manage that you're this Wall Street guy coming into a construction business? How has that disconnect or not been?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is just to be aware of that, right? I mean, if you're aware of how other people perceive you, then you're able to say certain things or not say certain things, do certain things, not do certain things. So, and there's always this like internal debate I have is like, should I be working on my weaknesses or playing to my strengths? And the answer is I mostly play to my strengths. So my strengths are in the office. I'm very good at communication. Like, I'm the master of email, right? So if someone emails me, I'll email them back within an hour. I read the email before I send it. Like, I really, really put a lot of time and energy into communication, because I think a lot of people are not good at communication. And I think particularly when it comes to small businesses, having real communication skills is like a key edge to success. But I don't go on the job site much, because when I do, I feel out of place. I mean, you got these grizzled guys wearing boots, and you've got, you don't have a lot of people on there that look like me. And so, that's Brandon's job again. And I've had people like make comments to me about my sort of personal style of like phone conversation, where I can be impatient. And so, I work very hard on like not responding to emails, or to, not engaging in situations where that can be like a negative, or that could be a liability. That perception of me could not be a liability. And really what it is I feel like I try to be a student of human nature, and especially of my own nature, and to always kind of see like, what are my own biases, and how is this going to negatively impact this outcome? And just be humble, I mean, and make light of the fact that, I'm like the whitest guy out there, and I have a whole labor force of Hispanics who speak Spanish, So when I meet with them, I think a lot of times they look at me and they're like, and I speak fluent Spanish too. So that makes it even better. Yeah. So that's something.
Wait. I thought they look at you and just feel completely alienated. But so does the Spanish help or not? It must.
It does help. The problem,
or just confuses them further. You're saying?
Yeah, I think the confusion is when they've talked to me on the phone and they see me in person, and they try to match like the voice they've heard on the phone with the face they see in front of them. The problem with that is that as we're growing more and more, I don't really want to have as much like one-on-one contact with a lot of the frontline workers, just because what to them is like this huge emergency that they just want to scream and be upset about and quit over, to me is like a nothing. So a lot of times I have a hard time just even kind of relating to, I mean, and because of a lot of them are crazy, and they do get crazy about nothing things. But
give me an example. Give me an example.
Yeah. So, I pay them for the previous week, and I'll pay them for all their hours, and I might give them an allowance for gas. And I might have put $25 instead of $35 for a day for gas. And that's like a huge thing to them, And again, it's good for me. So in managing my business, I've tried to keep a lot of things very manual and not automate them, because it forces me to stay more like, have my fingers more like on the pulse, so to speak, of the business. And part of that is like that these are people that are making, that they have a very different life than I do, right? They don't make as much money. They struggle to put food on the table, or they struggle to support their families, whatever. And so like it's important for me to be reminded of that. And if that means that someone's calling me on Saturday saying I got my paycheck and it's $10 low, and they're like screaming at me, it's like, oh shit. Like, okay, yeah, they're a little crazy, and they could probably find a better way to convey that. But like, this means so much to them, which then it just inspires me to like do a better job, to win more jobs, to grow the business so I can pay people more, and, and be like a positive factor in their life.
That's great, Christian. And by the way, this is not something that's come up very often, although it will in a recent interview. It did in a recent interview. Speaking Spanish with a Latin workforce, what do you think? So if let's say you didn't speak Spanish, I mean, just talk more about the fact that you do speak Spanish.
Yeah. So I mentioned all my crappy jobs growing up. So I worked with primarily immigrant, like Mexican migrant workers when I was in high school. And so not only did I take Spanish in, 8 years for high school and college, but I would like spend 70, 80 hours a week working on these farm jobs. And so I just got a lot of chance to practice it, out there all day. And so, I mean, I would encourage anyone to study Spanish as opposed to another language, because it's the most useful as an American. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been situations where it made it was the difference in terms of getting to the right outcome, keeping the customer happy, because, I have Brandon, my main manager, doesn't speak a word of Spanish. So he's sort of like, will speak English and the person will nod, and they don't really know though. They nod and say, yes, I understand. Then they'll go do the wrong thing. So, I always thought that I would like use my Spanish and go live in Argentina and be like an emerging markets trader or something, not be, managing 100 cleaners. But, we just hired our first Spanish speaking manager. He's a Mexican. He immigrated to the US when he was 17. So I finally have successfully gotten someone who's a intermediary between me and my employees who can speak Spanish better than I can. So,
and more on this point about having an intermediary, I'm hearing both that you want to remain close to the business, I think, as you put it, do things manually, so that finger on the pulse, keep a finger on the pulse and the value of that. On the other hand, as you said, you're an executive oriented, person, a business minded person. So you understand the value of working on, not in the business. And you are working on the business type things like hiring this intermediary. So which is it? How are you striking that balance to work on versus in?
So
because there's value in both. Yeah.
One piece of advice that someone gave me at my last job, when you're involved in a big trade, it's uncomfortable. So you can tend sometimes to hurry forward to strike a deal and get out of that feeling of discomfort that comes with uncertainty. And so they said it's about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And I try to put myself in uncomfortable situations more and more. I'll give you an example. I serve on the board of trustees of my son's school, and the whole, it's a school for kids with learning differences. And so a lot of the parents and a lot of the staff are just very different people. And it's uncomfortable for me being in this environment, and so I keep committing myself to more and more things and getting deeper and deeper because, this podcast is uncomfortable. I feel nervous. And so I like doing things. Good, man. Oh, thanks. No, but I feel like I've come across as very nervous. I feel nervous.
No.
But I like doing things that make me uncomfortable because that's where personal growth comes from. So, right. Yeah. So it's both. So at the one hand, I do like to play to my strengths. But I'll go out to the field and go walk and I learn more from, being in that uncomfortable situation than I do being in my comfort zone.
I'll press you a little bit on this, Christian, because you've talked about yourself as a loner a few times. I have those tendencies as well. Have you ever challenged that about yourself and putting yourself in situations where you can be less of a loner?
Yeah, I do. So this is kind of one thing that I alluded to in our email before we spoke, but that I think that a very, very important part of being a successful business owner manager is having some kind of a spiritual, life, whether it's seeing a shrink or whatever. It's having that awareness that comes from getting out of the day-to-day bustle and hustle. And so my faith practice is I meditate, right? And so meditation is the ultimate loner activity. And I do it every day. It's phenomenal. It's one of the most important productivity and efficiency enhancing things that I do, as well as being good for the soul. But I also go to church on Sunday with my family, even though I'm not a believer of the religion that my wife takes my kids to. And I sit there and I perceive all these people are here and they're all singing these songs together and saying these prayers or whatever. And I'm it seems weird to me, but I've had this sort of epiphany that I think that's a big part of what religion is. It's a social activity. Yeah, it's about God, but it's also about being with other people. And, so I certainly don't enjoy going to church. It's uncomfortable for me. I kind of view it as I go in every time saying, how can I get something positive out of this? And then, so the philanthropic part, being on these boards, it's very hard. I love my business because I see something that needs to be done and I do it. And then if you're on a board, you don't get to do that. you might sit at a meeting and like have strong thoughts, but you struggle for the right way to disagree with others. And you feel like, I feel so much responsibility for the outcome with very little like authority to influence the outcome. Right. So that's very uncomfortable. And that's kind of like why I'm doing it. I mean, I think I can help and offer perspective that they need, but that's pretty uncomfortable.
Well, just to distill this theme, I mean, I love the phrase. In fact, I think I've heard it to learn, what was it? Be comfortable in discomfort, or learn to find comfort in discomfort, something like that.
Yeah.
It's such a good one. I'm a believer. I like to think that I've maybe not done that super hardcore, but there's an element of that in my personal philosophy as well. This is awesome, Christian. I'm just keeping my eye on the time because I want to hear about I want to share with everybody your second acquisition.
Yes.
Which hasn't been quite the success story of the first. Three things, two of which we've already touched on. The value of finance. So you come from this hardcore finance background. Mm-hmm. I'm very cognizant of having a lot of former finance people on the podcast, because those who don't have that background are discouraged because you, for the obvious reason that they feel like, oh, if I don't have a finance background, can I buy a business? Businesses are fundamentally at the internals of a business are really the flows of money around, which is finance. So, and you have, said very forcefully, I can't remember if you already said it today or you said it to me offline, the value of having a finance background can't be understated. So maybe share your thoughts on it, but what would you tell, most importantly, what would you tell people who don't have a finance background? Should they not do this?
So I think that, first of all, I think that this groundswell of ETA is great, but I think that the skills that it takes to successfully run a small business, as much as anything, like you're well served having some gray hair. And like I posted this on a search funder chat, and this is not the finance thing, but this is, someone was talking about how hard it was and, whatever. And I had a guy tell me that they spoke to a Navy SEAL, a guy who was a former US Army Ranger, that said running a small business was the hardest thing he's ever done, harder than being in combat in Iraq.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I've had guests say exactly that.
Yeah. And I think the more life experience you have and the more you like get beaten down, like my thing on this, I posted on Search Funder was like, get married and have some kids, like raise a few kids. That will humble you. That will give you gray hair and beat you down. And like, it's having that humility and patience that life teaches you that is so like important in terms of, at least for me. And I am always trying to like be aware of me and how I'm different than other people, because you look at, all these young hotshot, tech guys that build enormous businesses in their 20s. So maybe I just needed life to smack me around enough to be, to be a better business owner. But, I think, look, it comes back to, you can strengthen yourself where you're weak. I think if you can, there's probably a lot of good online courses. But to the extent that ultimately businesses are about money, right? It's like revenue, costs, profit. And if the numbers don't work, then you don't have a business. And I think that's probably why most of them go bankrupt, is that, most business startups fail is because the numbers just don't work. And so the faster you can identify the like I would sign an NDA, get a write-up from a guy on BizBuySell. I could look through the P&L statement and I know instantly if it's a good business or not, just because like I speak that language. So, but on the other hand, I'm not great at managing people. I'm great at managing my managers, but I'm not great at like, dealing with these uncomfortable emotional situations. And so, I have managers that are good at that, and I have good relationships with them. And I say, I'm going to delegate that to you because that makes me uncomfortable and I'm not good at it. And that's not the highest and best use of my time. So I think you can do the same thing with finance. You just, you have to have someone who you really trust.
Yeah. Well, and just to weigh in here, I would feel that you have to have some comfort with certainly a little bit of math. I mean, you can't run screaming from arithmetic.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally there is math at work here. However, like seventh grade math is probably, or sixth grade math is probably enough, because it's mostly adding and subtracting. There are instances where there are, the effects of compounding and some exponential stuff and some fractions. Right. And that's going to come much more naturally to a finance person who has been swimming in that for years. And there can be a little of that. And you should, audience member, educate yourself on that stuff. There are plenty of finance courses that you can take. You don't need to take a 25-hour finance course, though. You can probably take a 2 or 3 hour one and just, like Christian said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. So this isn't, first of all, if you're somebody who just runs from discomfort, you probably shouldn't be on this path anyway, period.
Exactly.
So wherever you're uncomfortable, if that's enough of something that you just can't handle, then you probably shouldn't just be on this path. But so lean into it somewhat, but I feel that you don't need to be a finance jockey to do this. And like Christian, you just said, there's outsourceable help. Fractional CFOs are now a thing, for example. So that's kind of where I land.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Okay. And then just more about compounding. I said we'd return to this. Mm-hmm. You're happy with, you're frustrated with because the little changes you make, it feels like you don't get anywhere. You're treading water. Yep. And then you look up 5 years later and holy crap, look at all this change I've made. Yep. Did I basically just take the words out of your mouth, or is there more to say?
No, I think that's exactly right. But I don't think it's, oh crap. I think it's like, I think I've been very good to my managers. I've made an effort to always do the right thing and pay them more than they could earn at another job, but also give them more responsibility. So like Brandon, I mean, he basically runs things. I'm sure there's customers out there that thinks that Brandon is the owner of Resolute. But like, when I have anything that needs to be done, I don't say, and this is really hard. There's a tendency for a lot of business owners, I think, and managers in general, to feel like they need to be involved in every decision. Partly it's maybe just feeling responsible. Maybe it's ego. It's, this thing's going to happen and I need to be part of it, or I need to have my stamp on it. I need to have credit for it. I need to somehow, and I just do the opposite. Like I read a lot about the history of World War II. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The reason that the U.S. won World War II as much as anything else against the extremely well-trained Nazi and Japanese troops is that our military is like a metaphor for our society, which is that responsibility is pushed down to the lowest chain. So you have a field team, a leader of a machine gun team, and if he sees the opportunity to take the initiative, he would take it. That's how you win battles, right? Whereas the Germans would be more likely to go back up the chain of command and ask for approval from, the general to do this thing, right? And so having that flexibility in the field, in the moment of fire was like maybe the key thing that won the war for us in World War II. So that's how I try to run my business. So I say, I'm going to hire you. I'm going to put you down at the ground level and just make decisions. And if you really have a question, then call me and ask me, whatever. But like, don't call and say, I could rent this scrubber for $100 or this scrubber for $110. Just make a decision. Like, I'm focusing on other things. And then then you're a manager working for Christian Bateson, and every job you've ever been at before, your managers told you what to do and told you were doing it wrong. And they've never had faith in you and given you like autonomy and paid you for making good decisions in a situation of autonomy. And that's what I do. I say, look, just figure it out. If you really have a question, call me. And then again, people make mistakes. So I have one of my managers, so he's taken it too far. So when there's a problem, he doesn't tell me, he just tries to solve it. So I had to be like, no. This approach works in normal situations, but when there's a customer problem, someone's upset, something went wrong, then you have to involve me, because not that I don't trust your judgment, but I just want to make sure that I agree with you. And so then so now he's learned that he can manage 98% of stuff, but in the 2% of times when there's a problem. So that's like one example. And so you give people more and more, and you can see as you see that they're capable of managing, you give them more responsibility, and then you pay them. And so that's why I have now 4 managers who basically run my business for me. And I can devote all my energy to my customers, right? And when I say my customers, I don't mean like the guys on the ground on the job site. I mean, the guys in the office, the guys that are making decisions about whether to hire Resolute or another cleaning business. I can give A+ effort on every single bid for every single customer. And that's how we're growing our market share with existing customers. And we're adding new customers who like, hey, I hear Resolute's doing a great job. You should get a number from them, for this thing.
Awesome. What you said about the U.S. military, it's so funny. I just myself learned this. And the explanation was so close to what you just characterized from World War II, because it was somebody in the search community, and I said, the civilian, my naive civilian view of the military is that it's all taking orders. And yet so many, there's such an overrepresentation of veterans in the ETA world, because they get, the phrase is, all this leadership training, leadership experience in the military. But I finally said, but my sense is that the style of leadership there, or your experience there, would have been just following orders. And obviously, that's not, when you're the owner of a business, what it is. And they explain, no, the culture of the U.S. military is different and unique in this way, that there's this extreme autonomy. Of course, you have a chain of command.
Yeah.
But at you have a mission. And within the parameters of that mission,
yes,
you as leader have a ton of autonomy.
Yeah.
And it's just such a crystallization for me. And I didn't know as an American that our military has this feature. It's really cool. It's a really cool insight.
Yeah. And I was going to mention earlier, and I know we're running short on time. I was going to mention earlier, Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership. And if I could tell anyone 3 books to read as a small business owner, one is Shoe Dog, one is Extreme Ownership, and then, Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. But Extreme Ownership talks about the mission. And I have to tell myself all the time, I'm like, I'll be struggling with something and I'm like, no, you're making it about you. It's not about you. It's about the mission, and I'll tell that to my employees too. It's about the mission. So yeah.
You made a second acquisition. We're just about to hear a very abbreviated version of that story. But before we do, give us the context of what your bigger vision is for the rest of your career, now that you've bought one business and clearly have aspirations to buy more.
Yeah. No, I mean, I want to have a business that generates $100 million in revenue and, generates $10 million in cash flow. And, when I'm 70, I can decide to sell it for $100 million, or I can, keep it, have my kids run it. I mean, I just want to because I keep learning different things as I progress, that like when you get to the false summit of a mountain, then you can see where the next summit is and the next summit. Yeah. So you have to keep climbing for these vistas to open up. And that's kind of like what continually happened for me. And that's kind of a good tie into your to the second acquisition, which is, during COVID, I'm sitting home, my kids are home doing online learning, and the business was slow, but it was basically running itself. And I was like just bored. And so I decided I was going to buy another business and replicate the success of my first business. And so I found it was my experience with the maintenance cleaning business, the sort of janitorial business, but it was a tougher nut to crack, much more competitive, lower margins. But I found this business on BizBuySell. The founder was French West African. She grew up in Paris, but she was moving to Senegal, so her kids could experience, kind of more of the culture that she grew up with. She had grown this business very rapidly during COVID, which I should have realized that COVID was a big driver of the growth. But she was offering it for $650,000. It was advertised at $185,000 of SDE. But when I ran the numbers through this earnings model and I figured out all the things that I could take out, the costs I could take out, I figured it was more like $250,000 of SDE. And so at $625,000, that would be, 2.5 times. Wrote an offer letter. We negotiated. She was at 650. I started at 600. We had a deal at 625. So there were a lot of red flags, which I ignored because I wanted to buy this business. One was I sent Brandon down, my field manager. I said, go spend some time with Jamila and tell me what you think of this thing. And he called me after. He said, look, she's very involved in this business. She's out there. She's out at all the jobs. She knows the customers. She knows the ladies that are doing the cleaning. She's the key driver of this business. And this business is located an hour and a half away on the south side of Atlanta. I live on the north side of Atlanta. So he was like, we have all these big contracts we're winning with Resolute. Like, I'm just, it could be a bit of a distraction. And so, of course, I just disregarded what he said. And then my SBA lender took a look at the numbers, and because they have to give a business valuation, they said this business is worth $550,000, not $625,000. So rather than saying, oh, here's another reason for me to pump the brakes, I just did a side letter with her and said, I'll pay you this additional amount after XYZ, which I'm paying now. And trust me, every month that I have to send her that money, it just makes me feel sick to my stomach. And then
Christian, why were you so hot and bothered about this business?
Because it was growing. I thought this business could go from, so when I bought it, it was 800,000 of revenue and call it, 250,000 of cash flow. I thought within 5 years, it could be a $5 million revenue business. I just basically took the last 3 years of growth and extrapolated forward without thinking about what was involved in driving that growth. One, COVID, and everybody who owned a business just was willing to pay anything to have it perceived as being clean by their customers.
Mm-hmm.
And two, that you had this high energy, really friendly, outgoing, charismatic person that was building it from the ground up. And, she would tell me, oh, Christian, I went to Africa for a month for vacation and the business ran itself. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this sounds great, right? So she caught me leaning, and, it's just I think this is one of these lessons that have to be learned over and over. And I mentioned earlier my friend Tim Clark, who has 20 years experience doing this now. And we have these conversations, and he's like, I have all these rules for myself, but I break them all the time because I just decide that I have to have the business, and that stuff washes out. I mean, he's gotten himself into bad deals, or what he thought were bad deals that turned out to be amazing deals because it just worked out. So anyway, I closed on the business. Oh, here's another thing. Don't ever buy a service business unless it has a manager. So this business did not have a manager. And I said, well, I can take one of these like top-notch cleaners and coach him up and turn him into a manager. So candidate number one comes in, and I said, hey, you're doing a great job cleaning. I want to promote you to manager. I'm going to pay you $50,000 a year. You're not going to have to clean anymore. You're going to be able to go around and make sure that all the work's getting done well at all of our customer sites, and, restock supplies and stuff. So she says, well, I always wanted to make $3,000 per pay period, which is every 2 weeks. So that'd be $78,000. And, but it sounds like a lot of work. So I'll probably need to have like an assistant to drive me around. So I was just like, oh, okay. Well, you don't understand at all, like what just happened, but I do. And I was like, okay, next. Then I had another one of the ladies, and she would call me and email me and text me all the time. She didn't know how to manage people, right? I just have figured that managing people was just like cleaning, and it was just completely wrong. She made herself miserable. She made me miserable by just generally like lording it over the other ladies. Like, she'd been elevated, and now she was just mean to them, and she didn't know how to manage it. So anyway, finally, Jennifer. So one of my managers, Jennifer, who I had hired, and she was at Resolute. Yeah, she was an Army vet. Jennifer, like, served in the Army. She drove heavy earth moving equipment at a waste management site, and I mean, she's a little rough, right? But hardworking and very loyal, and she's like, I'll step in and be the manager of this business. So now she's working, running Resolute, running all the office stuff, and she's the manager for S&R. So I was like, all right. So now she went from making $60,000 a year to making, like $100,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of back to the same thing. And I didn't tell her how to do it. She just kind of figured it out. We had conversations when there were issues, but, we've lost a lot of customers. We lost probably like 30% of our revenue in the fourth quarter of 2022 once COVID was officially over. And we're working on adding those customers back. But it's not, I mean, the nice thing about it is I don't pay myself anything, have a full-time manager, and we're covering our debt, and we're generating cash. And, I'm kind of like just keeping it on the back burner. It's steady, and to really get it to grow, I haven't cracked the code yet. Right. So here we are, we're a year and almost 2 years in. I haven't cracked the code on how to really drive growth in that business like I have with Resolute.
And why is the answer not where you spend a lot of time at Resolute, namely kicking ass in sales?
Because kicking ass in sales in that business means going into people's offices, going into the doctor office and handing out cards, which means not being in my desk, but being in my car, driving an hour and a half through soul crushing traffic of Atlanta down to where all these customers and all the employees are, and actually doing it in person. Whereas Resolute, again, it plays to my strengths. It's all online. Like I'll get an email from a software platform that manages the bid process for all these different customers. And I can go in and do it all at my desk and look through the plans, put together the bid, send all the bids out on time. If there's an issue, it's all email communication or cell phone communication. I don't have to be there physically be there.
What do you think the learning is on the business other than the obvious that you were there were red flags and you just plowed through them because you somehow got emotionally invested in owning this thing?
Yeah.
Is there another learning, or maybe that's the learning?
I think the main learning is that in buying a business, you never can tell how good or bad it is until you buy it. I mean, you not really. You can do your due diligence. When you buy a good one, a really good one, you can still screw it up. And when you buy a bad one, you can still fix it. You just have to kind of keep on grinding, and just never give up. Right. I mean, I think I have now that I'm in this community, I've talked to a lot of people that have bought businesses, and some have better experiences than others. Right.
Yeah.
And I have a buddy who bought a moving business, and he was like, people would no show and he would be out there driving the trucks himself. And it was really hard. It was so uncomfortable for him. And I'm like, yeah, I know, it sucks. Right. And now he used that as fuel to like grow it and to get it to this point where he could hire someone. And now from a $500,000 revenue business, it's like a $2 million business two years later, And so like your fate is never written, right? We always have the chance. And like, if I decided that I was going to take my new business and really make it A+, that I wasn't going to play golf and I wasn't going to like do all the other things I do with my free time, I was going to be down there every day, I could drive that business. I'm making a choice, but I'm like, my lifestyle balance and, other things I would choose to do with my time are more important to me than that business. And plus my other business has grown so much. So it kind of like took the emphasis off of it.
Thank you for the story on business number 2. I want to close with a couple of questions that are kind of personal, but tied all together. One is just on the heels of what you just said about, having balance in your life. You also said you want to get to $100 million. You're giving yourself 20, 30 years to do that. Yep. But do you think that you can realistically get to $100 million in revenue, $10 million in EBITDA, having a basically balanced life?
Well, the jury's out. I mean, I think that, let's say if I went from, one business that did 2 million of revenue to now having two businesses that'll do, 8 to 10 million of revenue this year in 5 years, the CAGR is definitely there. I think a lot of it is just, I'm not out actively pursuing business opportunities. I think there's probably a good chance that to get to that number, I'm going to have to be more active. I think as my kids get older and they're out of the house, that will free up, some time and energy. But I also just think that I'm sort of waiting for opportunity to knock in terms of getting a call, because I hear these stories, so-and-so called and they wanted to sell their business. That hasn't happened to me at all. But look, there's a huge pie of residential cleaning, right? Everybody's looking for a good cleaner for their house. And like that's a business that I think I could scale up very quickly if I found the right one of those. But no, I mean, and this is a debate I'm having with myself all the time, right? This is the debate I had after Resolute worked out well, is like, oh, I want to buy another one. But I'm like, but then do I want to, I guess it's hard for me to handicap the likelihood that I can grow to that level and maintain my life balance. But so far it's been working.
Well, the other thing is, to put it back on you, philosophical guy that you are, this $100 million, $10 million EBITDA, nice, juicy, round numbers, completely meaningless. Why not 8 million? Why not 5 million? Why not 4 million? I mean, I get it. I mean, obviously, like there's something very what's the word? Magnetic, I guess, about nice round numbers. So we all are. If you ask anybody what their number is, it's probably going to be something round. But it doesn't need to be. And why does it need to be so big? You yourself said Atlanta's not a very high cost of living area. You don't. You no longer have to compete with the finance CEOs on Wall Street for net worth.
I don't know. I mean, you're asking like a fundamental question about human nature. I mean, why do people, why do people make so much money so they can like go down and sit on a fishing boat when they could just move down and, be a fisherman, be a fishing boat charter guide.
Sure. The old fisherman. Right. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. But I mean, I think for me, like, look, it took me 20 years of my career to figure out something that I'm really good at. I'm really good at running these cleaning businesses. Right. So now because I'm really good at it, I enjoy it a lot. And so because I have fun doing it, I want to keep doing it, but it's like the money isn't really, and this is something you hear people say, the money is just like a way to keep score, right? I mean, I don't need, I could retire now and be very happy, but like, I love what I do. And people say, oh yeah, you should sell it and you should buy this other thing. And I'm like, I don't want to sell it. Like, I like running it.
Yeah.
I I have these phenomenal managers who I'm able to, they enjoy their jobs more. They're making a lot more money. They're happier. It's positively life-changing for them. I couldn't do that if I sold the business to somebody else. Because the first thing the new business owner is going to say, wow, XYZ is making $150,000. Well, the market value of that job is $80,000. So there's some synergy, right?
Yep.
And what they don't realize is that this person is capable of doing more than that standard job description, which they do for me, which is why I pay them more. And that's why I have all this free time. So, look, I remember when I first started on Wall Street in 1999 and everyone had a number, right? My number was like 10 million. I was like, if I can get to 10 million, I'll retire and be out. And then it's like the mountain thing. As you get closer to that number, the number just changes to a bigger number. But I think, I just want to keep building this thing because it's fun, and the money is nice. And it's after 10 years of grinding to like support my family, it's nice not to have to worry about what things cost anymore. It's nice to get a new car. It's nice to fly first class when you go on, family vacations and stuff. But yeah, maybe it's 8 million, maybe it's 20 million, maybe who knows?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I when I said the number was arbitrary, I immediately started notching down. But maybe your number is 20 million. Why are you aiming so low, Christian?
Yeah. No, I mean, I just finished reading this book, David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me, and there's this moment where he's like, what else am I capable of? Right? I mean, his own like limitation was, I think I can only do this. But then he starts thinking, and then he starts doing all these incredible things, and that's kind of been the story of the last 5 years for me. Is like, there's really nothing I can't do. It's just a question of trade-offs, how much financial risk, how much time, how much energy, whatever.
Well, thank you. That was one of the other personal questions I wanted to ask. What does wife feel now about this path, given that she was resistant initially?
She doesn't talk about it so much anymore. That's kind of like her acknowledgement that it's been a success. No, I mean, look, she's happy. I mean, I think I'm happy. People always ask that question and, how are you guys doing? And I'm just like, we're great, but I feel like I have to tone it down because I feel like everyone asks that question. And then there were times in my life when I was not doing great, right? When I was like pretty unhappy and I'd be like, oh, we're great. So you just kind of say that as a rote response. But I mean, my wife is, she's happy. I'm happy. And this is actually great. I talked to a buddy, one of her former colleagues who she saw in New York last month. And and he's thinking about buying a business. He's a consultant and he wants to buy a business. And so we did a call, and I do a lot of these calls, and he was like, yeah, I talked to Connie, and she was like, Christian's doing so great. His business is doing so great. He's so happy. So to hear it, she would never say that to me, right? She would never be like, you're doing so great. You're so happy. I'm happy for you. She's just like more of like a dream crusher. She's a hole poker. That's what she says. So it's good that we balance each other. My enthusiasm and her whatever balance out. But it was great to hear from him that was her story at this cocktail party, that I was doing great. So.
Yeah. Although I got to say, Connie, these are the things that people should be sharing with each other directly rather than through the grapevine. But what do I know? Where do you slot in, Christian, going all the way back to the top in your family? I'm just curious, coming from a couple of Catholic hippies, as you put it, which, by the way, seems like a contradiction in terms. And one of
the
eight.
70s, man.
Okay. And one of eight. I'm just curious where you fit, capitalist, although maybe a more wholesome capitalist today than you were when you were on Wall Street.
Yeah.
Where do you slot in with the overall picture of the Bateson clan?
I mean, I've got a number of siblings who are teachers. My dad was a teacher before he became a principal, so I have a number of siblings who are educators. I'm the only person in business. I had a brother who dropped out of college and worked for the Forest Service for 15 years. Now he's doing construction. I did have one brother who sort of followed my path and did the finance track. But yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to see the different outcomes of all my siblings from, basically the same genetic stock and same upbringing. I'm the only one who kind of really went the hardcore, finance and business track. And are you a black sheep as a result? I think I've always kind of been the black sheep in some respect. Like my parents growing up, they would never say, "We're really so proud of you for making straight A's." It was more like, "We're disappointed in you that you don't want to come to church." Like they were very religious, almost in like an over the top kind of way. And I just was like, I'm getting out of here. Like it wasn't for me. And then I just never really came back. And I think it was being willing to take a series of leaps like that in life, and it's hard. I mean, I don't know. It's like who knows what makes you who you are and leads you to do the things you do.
I sure wish we knew that. Last question for you, Christian. It's been the underpinning of this entire episode, but I just want to ask you for a direct answer. Because in our emails, you've expressed how enthusiastic you are about this path.
Yeah.
It's something that you enjoy talking about. So take us home.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're willing to take a risk on the most positively life-changing career thing you can do, then, small business ownership is for you. And it's just a question of, are you at that point in your life where you're not worried about the downside of business ownership. It's more about on your deathbed, are you going to look back and say, I wish I'd done that thing, right? As opposed to, gee, I wish I had not taken chances. And I mentioned this too when we spoke. My brother Jordan passed away at 40 years old of ALS, and so whenever I get nervous, like even, like doing this podcast or going to speak to groups, I'm very uncomfortable in group speaking. I think about him, and he would have just been like, what are you afraid of? Like what, like what's the worst that's going to happen? In 1,000 years, no one's going to know we were ever here. So you might as well live life to the fullest and grab onto it while you're here. Amen.
Thank you, Jordan. Beautiful words to end on.
Yeah.
Christian, you've said you take calls. You like talking to people offline, one-on-one about the path. How do you prefer they reach out?
I'm on LinkedIn, then so they can certainly send me an email on LinkedIn. I'm on SearchFunder.
Well, this has been excellent, Christian. I really appreciated not only your story but your kind of philosophical angle on things, your self-examination. It's a great attribute. Thank you very much for your time, and congratulations on clawing your way back out of the misery black hole and into a life now that clearly fulfills you.
Thank you very much. And it's, very nice speaking to you and seeing you.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.